Hello everyone, and welcome to our first project showcase video. In these short videos, what I'm going to do is pick a few projects that relate to either the theme of the week or to the tool we're using, so you can see how people actually use this in digital scholarship. This week, we're going to look at how people have used Timeline.js in projects that I've been a part of, so I can give you a little bit of inside baseball on them. We're going to start first with thinking about the people who made Timeline.js as digital humanists. Then we're going to look at something called the Holocaust Denial on Trial Project, and we're going to end with the Hugo Black Digital Library, where these are all going to be different ways where collaboration is essential for the way the project was successful, and ways in which you use a tool to both see new insights yourself and to express those insights to others. A major theme in this course is how do I use tools to figure something out? How do I use tools as ways to analyze my structured data in a spreadsheet or unstructured data as in text? That's one end. Then the other end is how do I use these same tools or different tools to then express my research insights to others? In this case, we'll look at how Timeline.js does both. I would like to begin with Night Lab at Northwestern University as an example of the infrastructure of digital scholarship. We need someone who will make the tools and platforms that we're using in this class, and this is a group that made Timeline.js. I like to showcase them as an example of the different values we have in digital scholarship. They began as a journalism group. You notice that here, they try to push journalism into new spaces. So there's that interdisciplinary idea of they have a home discipline of journalism. You're reading this week, why do English studies departments tend to have DH in them? But it's actually an interdisciplinary movement. So they started with journalism and thinking, how can we use tools like timeline visualization? How can we make tools that will impact journalism? But this tool has been useful for education, for many different digital humanities projects, and we'll look at a couple in a bit. Notice, though, that there's aspects of community and collaboration. It's interdisciplinary. We have designers, developers, students, educators. It's non-hierarchical. Students and educators are included there together as people who have insights and who can share different things about digital scholarship, their different research. So you're seeing embeddedness and being lived out, things that you were reading about last week. Look again, open, collaborative, interdisciplinary. They know all the stuff. Experiments, so play is coming up in there. So they're a good example of a group that shows in what they're making and really embodies all of those sort of values that are important for digital scholarship. But they're also great because they provide you different tools for free that you can use. We're using Timeline.js. If you click projects, when you go to nightlab.northwestern.edu, you'll be able to see different ones. We're using Timeline.js, but they have a bunch of storytelling tools. And we'll think more about digital storytelling as a genre later on in the term. But this is a great place to get some sort of different tools. So we're using timelines. You also make maps. For those of you that I know, there's lots of you who are in finance or organizational studies or business. Look, storyline could be a tool for you where you can say, okay, I have this structured data. I have this changes in numbers over time. Then you can do your analysis. There's different things like that. So look for groups like this. Remember, open source, scholar-driven, important phrases to look for. But how have people used this? So we're going to look at two examples. First, we're going to look at the Holocaust Denial on Trial. So I want to let you know for the next bit of this video, I'm going to be talking about the Shoah. And so for these project showcase ones, if anything is too difficult for you, I don't expect these to be required in the same way that the lectures are. These are more of, I'm trying to show you in a grounded way how you can use these tools for digital scholarship. But if this becomes difficult for anyone, feel free to go on to the next part where you see the Hugo Black Digital Library, or to stop the video. Go ahead and take care of yourself. I'm going to be careful, and there's not going to be anything very difficult shown in this, but I think this is a very important project. This is from Dr. Deborah Lipstaut's work. She is now currently an ambassador and was lifted up to that role by the Biden administration. But back when I was on this project, she was working in the Tam Institute for Jewish Studies and was working on her research on Holocaust denial. If you haven't heard of her before, there's actually a movie that's based off her life where she had accused, you see his name there, David Irving, of Holocaust denial, because he is a denier, and he tried to sue her for that. And so this project has different things related to that. It has the trial materials. So there's this idea of digitization in digital scholarship. How do I take different materials like printed materials, like books, things like that, and digitize them? Think of Google Books, things like that. There's talking about the project. So you always kind of want to have that too. Like you want to show people like what's the point of this project. And then there's also an educational aspect of denying Holocaust deniers, debunking Holocaust denial. And so there can be digital pedagogy, digital critical pedagogy, where I can go in and I could see things here. And then here we're learning, but we're also seeing examples of digitization, examples of text encoding. Part of what I was doing with this project was I was actually listening to the trial recordings, and we would record what was happening and summarize different areas so that researchers could go in, because that's part of that infrastructure of digital scholarship. Researchers could go in and do more research on it. But how does that relate to what we're thinking about in this particular week? We're thinking kind of like about how do we visualize history? How do we take historical data and relate it to others? Well, this is part of that too, because it's taking historical data that Holocaust deniers try to ignore or try to explain away, and then sharing it broadly. But we used, in particular, Timeline.js for that. And we made different timelines. And this was part of where I worked on the project. And this is a way we had to be interdisciplinary. So we had Dr. Lipstadt, where this is like her research area, where she's having sort of like the control over it and making sure that what we're saying is correct. There was a history graduate student who was writing the content. And then as someone who worked at the Center for Digital Scholarship, I was doing the visualization. So we needed different people. Remember, it's collaborative, not just because our ideology goes towards community, but because we need each other. We can't all do the same thing. But also want to point out this is an example of data storytelling, data as narrative, and data as interpretation. And so I know it's different than if I have, let's say, if I had like a spreadsheet of financial data, you might say it differently. And we'll get into that when we look at Palladio later. But these dates are particular data points where what happened that date. And we had to think through, how do we organize that? So you'll see there's different groupings. The same as political, if it was about the resistance or isolation and things like that, to make it where they spread apart, and the different eras below. And we had to go through some important decision making. One decision we made in this process, as we were deciding what kind of media, because we have a media rich environment here, we can add in YouTube videos, things like that. We had to decide what were we going to show. And we came to the decision together that we actually, because our purpose was to educate, in that we were particularly working against Holocaust deniers like Irving, that we were going to be careful, though, about the images that we chose in here. But notice also there's a lot, right? So NightLab actually says stick to 20. And most projects I've been on, we've gone way over 20. So this is designed, and NightLab's really designed to have it where you have like 20 slides and you can show them on a timeline. And you have a little neat thing that people can go through. We purposely chose to just completely ignore that in this project because it's overwhelming, isn't it? There's a lot in here. Like, what do I look for? What do I click on? There's just so much. Do I go through it individually? Where do I go? What do I see? And it's overwhelming because this historical event is overwhelming. There's so much to grieve. There's so much to record. And what we also noticed, remember I said that on one hand, a lot of these tools you're using in order to analyze, and others you're using to visualize or share. Timeline.js you normally see as a visualization, a sharing one. You do your research, You get your historical data, and you say, how am I use this timeline to do kind of a public scholarship work? This is an example of public scholarship. But while I was putting this together, something that we kind of noticed as a team is there's a lot with the timeline that's looking at the Shoah, and there's almost as much looking at this timeline's about denial. It's looking at who was first doing it, what are the different publications, what are the different arguments they're making, and things like that. It's a lot of that, and nowhere near as much for judgment and remembrance. That's what this timeline is. And so in the process of being part of this work to debunk Holocaust denial and to have the truth be shared visually with the timeline visualization, it kind of emerged from that, oh no, there's so much effort having to be done by people trying to deny that this happened rather than justice being done. And so when you're doing your own projects, think about that. How are there things that you can discover? How can you use these differently? So some of the platforms, I'll maybe give you pointers to say, oh, okay, here's how they make it. Here's how they generally do that. But if you break those kind of rules, that could be a good thing for getting at your insight. For the last part of this video, I would like to talk about the Hugo Black Digital Library. Like the Holocaust Denial on Trial project that we looked at, this is a public-facing project that focuses on historical research. Where it's different is that it's more of a place-based analysis of an historical figure, where it's looking at how has the place, the physical space this person comes from, formed that person, and how is there a legacy for that person in that space. So Hugo Black was an influential 20th century Supreme Court justice in the United States. And he was born and raised in Clay County, Alabama. And so this is a community engagement or public scholarship project where someone who works in digital humanities, this again was a project I worked on, and the group from the center I worked at, we worked with local people in Clay County, Alabama, who were wanting to build a memorial. So they had a space set aside for a memorial and the monument, and we were going to build the digital library that would be part of educating people about the Supreme Court justice. But how does that relate to what we're thinking about this week with how to visualize historical data? Well, if you go into the research area, they have a timeline too. They also have a database of the U.S. Supreme Court opinions written by Hugo Black, and you can see the majority opinions, the dissenting opinions, and many of the full texts are on there. But it's an ongoing project where we're adding more. You see different resources of collections, an audio-visual library, Senate speeches and remarks. He was a senator before being a Supreme Court justice, and original documents and transcripts. So this idea of digitization's in here too, because part of digital scholarship, that's why it's in libraries often too, is how do I digitize print materials to have it where I can both work with them, different areas, to store them and keep them safe, and also to be able to do different research with them, like textual analysis. Like h.org, the Hugo Black Digital Library has a timeline, also use a timeline.js. And this one has a very similar thought where it does not restrict itself to 20, because it's trying to show all of the things that Hugo Black accomplished in his life and what goes on in his legacy, things like that. What I kind of want to showcase in here is the multimodality of it, and how that you, by multimodal means different modes, visual, audio, things like that, and how you can bring in different times to speak to each other. For example, this one about JFK records a speech, and that was in 1937. But as we work on this project, Harvard University released that and put it on SoundCloud. So there's ways where work of others, you can come across it and bring it into work you're doing as kind of a shared insight of like, look at the whole aspect of this time in history. I also like to show that this is a good example of how you can do more than just images or text. So we have image about Brown versus Board of Education. Hugo Black is an important person to read about that history. But also we have later on, as we go through these, by the bottom are his different opinions. There was a certain point where they were recording the different proceedings when they were debating at the Supreme Court. And so you can also do embed codes. So this is from a Creative Commons. So I have the ability to use it as long as I get attribution and I don't sell anything, where you should go through and see the transcript and it will highlight the particular justice. By the way, that's Hugo Black right there. And so can be a way to showcase there's more that you can do with Timeline.js than it looks like at first hand, and it kind of depends on what the needs are of your project and how you want it to display. So what we looked at are two different ways of using Timeline.js, and we've looked at NightLab itself, the group that made this platform. And consider, as you think ahead to what your final project will be, you'll be thinking through, what tool do I want to use to analyze and research, and what tool will I use to share my insights?